Good morning and welcome to Hyderabad Literary Festival. Today's panel, Queering the Conversation, brings together voices from literature and scholarship to engage with questions of identity, relationships, and their place in society today. It's my privilege to introduce two panelists, Kazim and Paromita Vohra. Kazim is author of numerous books of poetry, fiction, essays, and cross-genre work. His recent publications include Sukoon, the novel Indian Winter, and Black Buffalo Woman. Black Buffalo Woman has won the Poetry Foundation's Pegasus Award. He co-founded Nightboat Books in 2004 and currently serves as Professor of Comparative Literature and Literary Arts. He is also the Associate Director of the Institute of Arts and Humanities at the University of California, San Diego. Paromita Vohra, who are also, I'm welcoming you back, Paromita, to this stage again. She's a filmmaker and writer whose work spans documentaries, digital media, art installations, and television. Her films include Unlimited Girls, Q2P, Where's Sandra, Morality TV, and Loving Jihad, Partners in Crime, and Working Girls. She is the founder of Agents of Ishq, a pioneering digital platform on sex, love, and desire, and writes a weekly column for Sunday Midday. In conversation with them is Sneha Banerjee, who teaches political science at the University of Hyderabad and whose research focuses on gender, reproduction, and law. She holds a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University and has conducted postdoctoral research at the University of Zurich. Over to you, Sneha.
Thank you so much. Welcome all of you to this panel. On India's Republic Day, it is my pleasure to welcome you to yet another panel after the morning one, which spoke about food to other sensory experiences, which are both tangible, intangible, and everything in between. This panel is called Queering the Conversation, and Paromita has something to say about that name. But before she does, if we just look at the term queer, it means strange. But a whole range of people have actually claimed that and embraced that for themselves. And it is great that this strangeness occupies the center of our conversations today. So that's a great thing to happen on Republic Day. Which also brings me to the point that both the books that we are going to focus on in this panel, the book by Kazim is a novel. It's called Indian Winter, and Paromita has edited an anthology which is called Love, Sex, and India. Love, Sex, and India, not in India, is something which is very noteworthy in this. And since the name of our country makes titular appearance in these, I would first like to ask both of you about the Indianness in these books. Paromita, in your foreword, you say that these stories are about what it means to be Indian, what it means to be sexual. Kazim, the novel starts with coming to India, and it's so poignant that you described Indian winter as hot, weather-wise, and as we go along the novel, we explore other sorts of hotness along. So I would like to invite both of you to reflect on the idea of Indianness in these.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you, especially in Hyderabad, where one of the chapters of the book takes place. takes place in Hyderabad, at the Hyderabad Literary Festival. What's Indian about it can be, partially it is a diasporic writer returning to India after, it's not specified, either a long time away or he was born in America and is a second generation. I myself was like 1.5 generation. We emigrated when I was already born, but my formative experiences were in the West. So this novel is sort of autobiographical. It is truly fictionalized, but I would call it maybe autofiction. The main character is a writer. He has some experiences like some of the experiences I have had. And one of the things he's doing in India is trying to forget his life. As so many people do when they travel, they don't necessarily travel to truly engage with the place they're coming to. They're running away from something, you know? Even if what they're running away from is maybe not dramatic, maybe what they're running away from is boredom, as simple as boredom. In his case, it's quite more serious what he's running away from. But what became Indian about it to me was, as he travels across India, and he doesn't stay in one place very long, he keeps going from city to city, moving around. At some point, he ends up in Kerala, and he tries to leave, but he ends up going back to Kerala at the end of the book. So probably half of this book actually takes place in Kerala. But what felt that about me, what is Indian about it to me, is precisely that plurality of experience, the range of different places, the landscapes, the people, the cultures, the languages, the sounds of the languages, the cadences of life in different places. If there's one place on earth that I relate to as much as I relate to my own home in the United States, it's probably India, because it has that same sense of multiplicity and complexity. I think Salman Rushdie's metaphor for it, or it might have been Agha Shahid Ali's metaphor, I forget. One of them had the metaphor of the mirrored ceiling of the Mughal mosque, that the multiplicity of the lights flickering in all different directions. And that's what happens in this book. And that's what is India to me as well.
I mean, I think the idea of what it is to be Indian or what is India is constantly in play, right? And we have numerous definitions, redefinitions occurring almost on a daily basis ever since this idea became more like girded, like within colonialism and that sort of a thing. So I think that what it is to be Indian obviously means about whatever whatever number, billion point, however many we are. Yeah, and I think I think there is an idea of India which is the nation, which also is, of course, constantly, what it means is in play, but it's a kind of bureaucratic notion, and it's about boundaries, etc. So I like to also think about what it means to have a land called India, a place where people live, how they live in it, and as they live, how they define what it means to be Indian, right? And I think that I like this term, Desi, because Des means so many things, right? It doesn't just mean nation, it means even your village. Like the word for home is sometimes hum des ja rahe hain, etc. So I like this word Desi. Desi is all the things that most people like us, who are city dwellers, who see ourselves as secular, liberal, and we are elites. Desi is something, hum sab usse thoda katrate hain, you know, like I'm part Muslim, and my grandmother would sometimes say, I don't like those colors, वो बहुत मुसलमानी रंग है, right? There are certain kinds of things, but she didn't mean the pale pinks of the Mughal Musalmani rang. She meant that more working class, the color of khas, the color of ruafza kind of colors, right? So there is a way in which desi smells, desi sights, desi ways of being are always something that we try to remove from our person in trying to define this bureaucratic Indian and the ideal Indian, so to speak, who does not carry the inflection of all these ways of being. These ways of being are very sensory also. So if we were to extend the idea of food, I mean, today there is this thing again that there's a lot of scrutiny on what you eat, right? And are you gluten-free? And there's a kind of health debate, a sanitary health debate around it. But somewhere the delight of food, the memory that food carries, the the overindulgence that food means, etc., is something that we are continuously saying is not good. And so it is with sex, I suppose. So I think that in talking about sex and love in India, or as many, many Indians experience it and want to talk about it, you're also saying that the idea of what it is to be Indian and sexual is something that we could discuss, because we're always being told two things, right? That it's not in our culture to be sexual in a certain way, or in our great days of yore, in the ancient sexual utopia, everything was absolutely wonderful. So neither of these two things is actually the whole truth, or even the partial truth sometimes. So I think, yes, for me, that idea of plenitude, even Indian aesthetics, when you look at it, like if you look at the classic Bollywood film structure, before it got sanitized into this, Netflix type of 3-act structure, it's full of so much stuff. Like there are songs, there's one cabaret, there's a fight scene, there's a mother who's crying, there's a mother-in-law who's mean, there's a sister, there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think that idea of so many crisscrossing elements simultaneously in the frame, that if you had to ask, like if you put a gun to my head and said, now tell me what you think is Indian, I would say that crisscrossing aesthetic of some place for everything. It's not a perfect thing. Like there are hierarchies within that, yes, but somehow that simultaneity is what I think of as Desi. And the excess of it, to not fear the excess. I think that's Indian, I guess, yeah.
Thank you. Both of you gave me brilliant segues into my next question, which is...
We're glad to serve you.
The ideas of pluralities, of crisscrossing, and of boundaries brings me to the question of gender and sexuality. In both the books, these ideas find central focus. They don't make announcements and grand entries, but they are there in various parts of the books, in various stories in the anthology as well as throughout the novel. For example, in the anthology, there are several ones which really are very difficult to box or to label, and they really defeat attempts at classification, because the very purpose of those narratives is to question them. Similarly, for example, in the novel, while talking about novel, there's always this possibility of spoilers, so I don't want to do that, but still I can't resist talking about this, that since you said it's autofiction, the protagonist at one point says that I don't fully feel like a man, but I'm not a woman either. Or there is an experience where they land at a gathering of openly queer people in Bangalore. The protagonist is slightly surprised. I fail to understand why. But the protagonist is very reflexive and says that I don't know why I noticed this person's transness. Why am I calling this person butch? And is suddenly taking a step back, which I thought was a brilliant move to do. So how do we actually think about pluralities without also washing over the fact that it is important to talk about these differences? Also, in this current moment, we have vocabulary, which we earlier didn't have, right? So how do we go between these of naming, the importance of naming, but on the other hand, trying to not essentialize them?
Yeah, the main character of my book, and it's written in first person, he kind of encounters queer India step by step as he goes through, and he has these, various different encounters with mostly queer men. Some of them become physical, some of them are just, in the platonic. But there are two characters that kind of recur, one character who recurs throughout is this other, much older gay writer who's kind of a tragicomic sort of figure that becomes a foil for the main character, who, as I said, is a stranger though he is Indian, he is traveling through the land like an Odysseus kind of figure, estranged. And then in the center of the book, in the Hyderabad section, there's this fabulous diva character who's a professor who shares a name. Her name is, in the book, my book, her name is Meera Kanadakal. She shares a name with the main character, as you noticed. She shares a name with the main character of Meena Alexander's 1993 novel Nampally Road, which also took place in Hyderabad. And so it was a little bit of an homage to that character and an homage to Meena Alexander herself, and a way of maybe doing a stealthy sort of sequel to Nampally Road, which has a kind of abrupt ending, if you've read that book. It has a kind of cliffhanging kind of ending. And she becomes, she's sort of like a guardian angel figure that he, the main character, she's another kind of counterpoint because she's very glamorous, she's beautiful, she has this makeup and hair and jewels and wonderful sari. And it kind of occurred to me, I hope this is not an offensive thing to say, but as I was working on it, it occurred to me that there's a certain kind of high femme Indian womanhood that is like, has like a lot in common with a drag aesthetic. You know, the high heels, the lips, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's really.
I feel very seen right now.
Yeah, so. Yeah. And so Meera K, as she calls herself in the book, she goes by Meera K, is a kind of like a drag queen in the middle of this book as well. And I enjoyed both the interaction of Ardashir, who's the older gay writer, and Meera K. The narrator himself is kind of a blank slate, as oftentimes a first-person narrator is going to be. You know, but they sort of exist there to kind of reflect him back to himself in a way.
I mean, yeah, I think just to take off from this idea of the high femme and camp aesthetic to some extent, I think that, you know, old Hindi films actually really show you that relationship with gender, like a very performative idea, and you have numerous types of those femme types, right? And I think that I miss that. In what we see now, where there's a very kind of limited notion of what a woman, and we have a lot of vocabulary, and we have films which are, I don't know if I'll call them queer themed, but they're LGBT themed, but they somehow seem to be missing that more slightly messy, dirty quality of that other very performed and very stylized way of presenting gender on screen. But I think I mean, to go back to the heart of your question about the need for naming something, you know, and I think there's a lot of power in that, because I think many of us know the aha feeling when we read the word mansplaining the first time, like that is just what I have been trying to say. So I think similarly, there would a gay friend of mine told me that he was very young and he heard on television or something somebody saying the word gandu. And he said, when I heard it, I just thought, I don't know what it means, but I think that is me. And I was like, what made you think that? And he cannot say what it is, what osmosis made him think that this, which is a slur, is also a description for me somehow. So I think that being able to, in Maya Sharma's book, Loving Women, Being Lesbian in Unprivileged India, a wonderful book, I highly recommend it. She spends half the book writing an introduction talking about the importance of choosing the word lesbian in a culture which is not naming that thing, though it exists in plenty. And the importance of naming it is a political importance. But I think it's important to remember that once something is named, the name should not become the limit of that experience. So I think what I see with a lot of young people who are engaging with Agents of Ishq is that they have the words, but they fit themselves into the word before they've really had an experience of themselves. And they start constraining everything about themselves to that word. So we will get a lot of job applications, for example, which usually say, I think I'm a great fit for Agents of Ishq because I am a queer, non-binary, kink positive. But very rarely, like, say, I am a writer, I'm an artist. I always read it and I think, like, yeah, but what can you do? Like, what should we hire you for? So, you know, this idea that I have ticked these boxes, this is my identity, and now this must signal everything about me, I think is a kind of normativity that has been imposed on labels, or not labels, but words, which described. They have begun to be words that define rather than just give a description. And actually, that is also the thing, the idea of queer, which was a kind of reclamation of something, and which questions heteronormativity, has over time been extremely disciplined, so that queer and LGBT become interchangeable, but not always an expansive definition of queer. So I think it becomes a comfortable way of talking about sex. That when we talk about sex, we're not going to talk about heterosexual sex or sex itself. We will put sex in the subject of sexuality. And then it becomes an abstraction, and we don't need to think about bodies and fluids and stuff people are doing, you know. So I think that there are always these complicated push and pull that is occurring, and language is the place where that push and pull occurs. But of course, experience always exceeds language, you know, and so does art. So just like in closing, there are sometimes young people who are very much schooled in vocabulary and concepts who will complain that, you know, I think I might be bisexual, but I hate Bollywood because it never showed me a bisexual character. First of all, that's debatable. And second, I thought, as soon as I heard that, I thought, there is a piece by an older gay man on Agents Fish which says, Dharmendra made me gay when I was 9 years old. I saw his thighs on screen and I just knew I was gay. And I thought that is actually the power of art. It suddenly brings you face to face with yourself through a kind of experience. And words can't always do that for you.
Yeah, and in the anthology as well as in the novel, there are references to, if not films as such in the novel, but definitely some filminess that you can see, as well as in several of the stories in the anthology. You do see the power of film. For example, Meera Nair's film Kama Sutra finds a reference in one of the stories. But to think of experience as the gateway to self-discovery, so to say, the other side of the coin is actually experiences of violations and violence, which are also common themes in both the books. That for the protagonist in the novel, some experiences of some traumatic experiences of the past as well as the present, some foreseen, some unforeseen, unfold and bring a pathway to self-discovery, so to say. And it's the same in the anthology as well. The anthology has multiple sections. I was quite intrigued, Paromita, that the section that you title Sex Actually is perhaps the only section where there is an editorial word before the section begins. And it foregrounds the question of consent, particularly in the in a hashtag #MeToo sort of milieu. But that section is not just about violations. It's a mix where we are really invited to think about gray zones, right? So my question to both of you is, how do we think of turning experiences of violence from trauma to extending something else? Also, here lies the question of exploring something with hindsight. For example, Sex Actually is also the only section where there's clear markers of when are the writers writing. So many of them have much of a distance. And in my conversation with Kazim yesterday, you also said that a lot of the auto part of the fiction has benefit from distance. So if both of you could reflect on this a little.
Well, I think there is a little bit of an irony in that one can often tell the truth more plainly in fiction, because it gives you, first of all, it gives you protection. I mean, it gives you cover. But I think more than that, it gives you a chance that you don't have to hew to the facts as they happened. You can kind of explore them, expand them, embroider them, and in such a way really get at more the essence of something the way it happened. You know, the way our memories often kind of, some small little thing will happen and our memory blows it up into some huge thing, and you know, like that. And so I was really able to explore all the multiple valences of queer relationships that I both did and didn't do in my real actual life the way it was lived, you know? The writer, the person upon whom the character of Ardashir is lightly based, he's really based on 3 different people. But the person, you know, that encounter, my trip in India where I was here for like 2-3 months, I only actually saw him one time. And that was it, and then I never saw him again. But as a character in the book, he continuously reappears. There's all these different themes the characters develop. So in that sense, fiction is is truer than the truth. As far as the issue of violence and consent that you talked about, there is a scene in a relationship where there's a young man who has been kicked out of his family and he's on his own and he doesn't have any money, and the main character is helping him and giving him money and trying to help him figure out what to do, and then there is some attraction there, and then there is a sexual encounter. And for the boy, boy, he's in his 20s, it's the first time he's ever had an experience like that. And so I had to write what was it was a fairly explicit scene, like heated rivalry type of scene.
Really delicious to read.
Delicious to read. But it is a model, to me anyways, I was trying very hard to make it, and I've been told it's a model of consent, where he's explaining, this is what would you like to do, this is how does this feel, do you want to stop now? Like, the whole full experience is geared towards the tenderness of experience for someone who has never had such an experience before. And there's 3 people in this. It's a non-traditional sex scene, I guess you would say. So not only is it this kid, the young man's first time, it's also 2 other people, and they're all trying to negotiate and everything together. So I always tell people it's a book. The book, it's in the United States we say NC-17 for the films that children are not supposed to read. So it has this nice, accessible cover, and I warn people, this is an adults-only book.
I completely zoned out of the process. Oh, yeah. So, I have to say, I slightly drifted because I was thinking about this division of fiction and non-fiction, which I actually don't recognize. I don't believe there is... there are some formal distinctions, I suppose, but the responsibility may be to indicate something. But in my films and in my writing, I don't recognize this. What I do recognize is a kind of like prose and poetry distinction, but which also overlaps somewhere, right? So I think that you like when in Agents of Fish stories, I'll say a concrete example is that we always offer people the option of using a pseudonym. We don't insist that this is supposed to be some kind of confessional that I stand up, I'm so bold, I can tell my story. The point is that you can tell a story and you can share an experience and you can do it in any which way you want. And I think like another thing that our editorial guideline has been that you're not allowed to use the word problematic anywhere on Agents of Ishq. It's a strict, and it took a long time to iron that out from many of our young editors' tendencies, right? Like putting that word in. So, for instance, we have sometimes struggled with, another specific example I love to give is of a young man who wrote us a story full of very many big words and quite contemptuous of many things. But at heart, it was a story about how he got into a WhatsApp relationship with another guy who basically, was a bit of a bounder and was playing the field and how he was heartbroken. And that was it. And I was like, gosh, like how should... So I sent him a few questions, but the first line of his essay was, I joined Grindr and everybody knows it's for losers. Okay, so I rewrote this line, and as I joined Grindr, which made me feel like a loser. Because the struggle for me when I saw that line was, he felt like a loser, so who am I to tell him, no, of course you're not a loser. But at the same time, he really shouldn't be saying the whole thing is for losers. So actually, through this interplay between the writers and us thinking about it, we evolved a kind of editorial guideline, right? And that you don't speak for others' experiences, you only speak for your own. And in a way, I think that question becomes very interesting when you're doing nonfiction, which I won't get into, it's outside our discussion now, but I feel like in these stories, I felt sometimes that they are more true than many fiction stories I've read, which is to say that both fiction and nonfiction can become tremendously self-serving. They can both be disingenuous, right? So it's really about not being disingenuous, that by in some way trying to get at a truth, because there are so many simultaneous truths. And then the two forms have got their own challenges and beauties. And then you paint over those beautiful pathways and you see where you get. Where sex actually, that series was very much linked to a moment in time when conversations about violence and consent became very widespread. And one of the things that we started to feel was that these conversations were quickly being made binary. So even this idea that yes means yes and no means no is not true to life. You know, it's like puts a pressure on you to know as soon as you've met somebody what you feel. And if, in fact, it is the opposite of consent, you know, this legalistic format. So I had made a music video in which I looked at consent as being yes, no, and maybe. And what is this maybe spectrum all about? And what is the back and forth, the interplay, the foreplay, the seduction, the flirting, the asking? All of that is the maybe time, right? So if we could think about it that way, it would be very interesting. And I think of many of the stories in this book as the maybe time, where people are trying to figure out what they want. But the conversations were all becoming about violence and justice. Somebody else is going to decide your violence. Somebody else is going to decide what justice means to you. In opposition to that, many of the people that wrote in, so we invited people to anonymously contribute their most memorable sexual experience, good, bad, or indifferent. And that invitation resulted in 100 entries, where people spoke about boring sex, violent sex, pain, anger, loveless marriages, one-night stands, the gamut. But the real thing that happened in that is, yes, that everybody had a different way of engaging with the violence that had occurred in their lives. Some people want the legal system to intervene. Some people really don't feel that their experience fits in what the justice system is offering, and they want to feel better in a different way, and that's justice for them, right? So I think that in a way these accounts, whether in fiction or in non-fiction, they provide room for these other experiences. We cannot fit all our experiences into a justice frame, like legislative framework. Let me put it that way, yeah.
That's a lot of food for thought for a social scientist who engages with the law. For those of you who may be interested, the music video that Paromita mentioned is called Consent Lavani. And it has Shakku Bai, and you should all look it up and watch it on YouTube. I have several questions, but I will ask one last before I invite both of you to read a little from the respective books, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Paromita, in the anthology, there is plurality of form also. There are poems, there's prose of varied lengths, so there are one-pagers as well as 10-pagers. Then there is also a comic, a graphic story, which is actually very telling because on the mast it has glasses, specs, so which is a very interesting metaphor for seeing and viewing. So how, and Kazim, in the novel, you are a poet. Some of the lines in the novel have actually stayed with me. They are poetic. For example, this one particular one, which was in Gen Z language, was a hard hit, which was like, I miss home, not the specifics of it, but the fact of it. So I just want both of you to reflect on how do you think of form, because both the books, in fact, are also about the act of writing. So they are writing about writing. In the anthology, writing is a way in which people are resolving issues for themselves, seeking closure, making meaning of their experiences. And so is the protagonist and other characters. And the protagonist is actually not just thinking about writing in the sense of how to frame, but what really touched me, and I am a person of stationery, also I really like different stationery, that this person also has spiral bind notebook for something, journal for something else, which was also very interesting. So the mechanics of writing, the tools of writing. So if both of you could briefly reflect on these.
Yeah, it is the act of storytelling and how one tells a story, what one leaves out. And in Indian Winter, the main character who's a writer, is struggling to write this book, and the text of that book appears inside Indian Winter in italics. And eventually, life as he's living it kind of subsumes the book. It starts to evaporate, and there's a blending between fiction and reality, quote-unquote reality, which is the character's reality. And he worries about how is it that he's going to be able to tell his own reality. And there's a part in the book where he actually says, instead of keeping this journal, I should just change it all into third person and pretend it's a novel, because then it will be easier to pretend that what it has actually happened was I made it up. And so there's there's an intentional blur between me and the main character, and between the idea of fiction and a travel diary, basically, that I never really wanted to surrender. He even describes translating poetry that I have translated. And he describes a book of his. He talks about a book that he published earlier in his career, and the book he's describing is a book that I have written. So there is a very intentional kind of flirtation from me through that book with a reader about what the reality of experience really is, you know? And I think it would be less interesting if the book was less fictionalized. But it really is heavily fictionalized. So that gesture is still a pose within the rubric of fiction, you know? Yeah.
I mean, I think that if there is anything that is a truth, then it is in form. You know, it's not actually in the things we say, but in the how of the saying. And I think I love form of all kinds. I love to play with form. And I think even in my documentaries, and I owe a lot of, what I learned in documentary filmmaking, I brought to Agents of Ishq. And I would say what I learned in Agents of Ishq, I have brought to making films again. So this interaction with people is always teaching you something new, right? So I think in documentaries, what happens is you interview somebody, and I feel that हर एक इंसान की एक तासीर होती है, you know, like there's a kind of essence, and you think, how should I edit the sequence? And you edit in the rhythm of the way the person speaks, their style of being, you know. And I think it was similar, like when, or even if you choose a subject, then you think about what should be the form of this film. There is no one documentary form. So I can actually choose in what way will the form convey the essence of this thought. And similarly, when people send in a story or have an idea, and because one of the great things about the internet was that there was picture, there was writing, there were so many things you could do. It's such a playful space. It was such a playful space once at least. And so when people would send in their stories, I would think, what would be the best way that the story can be read? And sometimes it is a straight memoir style. Sometimes I would suggest that I think you should talk to a couple of other people. Like I think it would really open out your narrative to be interacting with others. And in the case of the graphic story, actually Anshuman, who did that, was working. I think, and also when people were working at Agents of Ishq, then it was more fun because you knew them. And you would think like, oh, I think she could do really well, or he could do really well by choosing this form. And Anshuman is a graphic artist. And he told me the story, she told me the story about her grandmother. And I just thought what Anshuman remembers about her grandmother is this sensed experience of being roommates, right? And the way she spoke, and the little things about her. So we should do it in this, not just so that it's a graphic form, but that it should be in this way. And so we started working on it together, and I think it is such a beautiful piece, a lovely piece of work. And so there was a piece which is not in the book, which was like a fan fiction for Rani Mukherjee. If Rani Mukherjee were my girlfriend, and all these fantasies, it was a queer fantasy. So it was fantastic to read, and we created it like one of those old-fashioned greeting cards with lots of doves and flowers and that kind of a thing, right? So each piece allowed itself to be molded in this way. And so I think that's one of the strengths of these narratives. Otherwise, they have that danger of becoming like, oh, so many narratives about people's intimate experiences. And not that that's not interesting, but you get more than just that sex or love thing. You get the taste of their language and the taste of what the person is. Another thing that we did in terms of form is the English, right? The English is not good English. And it was pretty exciting the way people would write a kind of Malayali English or a Tamil English, like the cadence of their words and some of the words that they would put in. We never tried to iron those out because we just felt that adds to the form of this writing and the story, yeah.
Which is nice only. Yeah.
Nice only. As a person who has worked in Channel V, whose byline was, we are like this only. Yes.
Right. I'll just hold on to my questions now and invite both of you to read some excerpts from your respective books.
Will you lend me your copy? With pleasure. How long do you have the next one?
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Yeah. 2 minutes each, and then we open it up for questions.
I'll read very fast.
I'm just going to open it to
To my marks?
I'm going to open it to one of your marks.
Okay, sure.
How about, is that okay?
Of course.
In the used bookstore in Dehradun, I find not a book by Ruskin Bond, but a small blue book containing the short stories of Amr Hussain. They are like music, little poems. I sit on the sidewalk, reading. There is a bodhi tree overhead shedding its leaves. My own silence is muted by all the actual writing. Is this life I describe here? Is it real? Is it more or less real because it's been written down? Maybe when I am again in Kerala, before the sun and the sea, and having my body worked on, he's getting massages there, I will hear some sounds. The thing now is that I want to immerse myself in the liquid of poetry itself. I don't know what the shape is supposed to look like. And so what if I haven't seen Michael in so long? Maybe it is time that makes a book, not language. Adil Jusawala wrote a book after 35 years. Eleanor Lerman wrote a book after 25 years. Robert Duncan after 15. I want to write a book not only about the places I have been through, but a book about yoga, about salvation, breath, the body, God, age, a book like every other one. It sometimes feels like I have been writing my entire life. In any case, I will live. I have lost my will to prove something, that I love God, that I'm not stupid, banal, or ugly. How haunted I have been by those forms of weird hatred. How deep inside I planted those seeds. I can become light as I grow older, grow toward the sun, know a child's power and joy again. Everything is going to fall away. I too am going to follow and fall, and me with nothing inside, trying to let breath go through. Can I go back to my ordinary life and know myself now? And how should I write down the lessons, the ones I'm going to carry back to the cold, cold country, that place I call home? Thank you.
So I'm going to read at high speed because I thought I had 4 minutes. I'll preface what I'm going to read with. I wrote a story in an erotic anthology edited by my friend Ruchir Joshi, who was on the stage yesterday. And it was a very explicit sexual fantasy featuring a movie star and time travel and basically naked people all the time. And when it came out, a few people were upset with me. And said, how could you write such a thing? And, oh my God, this reads like porn for men and not erotica for women. And I was like, gosh. But the story was very popular, and I was quite pleased with myself. But the real question for me, I think, I have often wondered why these reactions, even if they pricked for a moment, never unleashed shame or self-doubt in me. What made me able to trust the responses of those who loved the story while feeling amused by the censorious ones? What enabled me to take away the understanding that while we often imagine that censorious voices are the norm when it comes to sexual matters, they may, in fact, be the minority and not represent how the majority feel about sex or life itself. It is not, dear readers, because I grew up in a sex-positive commune, but it does have something to do with how I grew up. Like any other middle-class Indian kid, I had no sex education in school and devoted considerable time to developing pseudo-scientific theories of how babies got made. In later life, I had my own share of posturing and shame around my desires, like anyone else. But I understood only after many conversations with many people that there was one fortunate difference. In my home, sensory delight was an everyday thing, not fetishized or overstated, just enjoyed. Poring over shade cards with excitement when the car had to be painted, the smells of an ever-growing repertoire of borrowed recipes filled us with anticipation long before it was time to eat. To memorize poems, to play cards, and to play music, to lose oneself in a book or in singing a song was considered natural and necessary. Naughty jokes we did not understand were in the air as grown-ups twinkled at each other. Time with friends was encouraged and hugs were plentifully shared. We were best friends with our senses. I would be 40 years old before I understood how generous this legacy was, despite the hurts and complications of families that were also my particular lot. Pleasure was not rationed in my home, and now I understand that that gave me, an otherwise awkward misfit, a confidence in the knowledge of my senses. It was this that enabled me, through the adversities and discouragements that social structures, institutions, and frenemies throw our way, to do the hardest of things, believe in what I liked, rather than be governed by what others disliked. This small thing was like a rope in a turbulent river that I clung to, and which helped me know myself and slowly, if painfully, accept myself outside their expectations and judgments. And it was how, most of all, I learned over time not to hide from my desires, whether sexual, romantic, or artistic, to always confess them to myself, even if I hadn't the confidence to admit them to others. I'm not saying it was easy, just that it was infinitely possible. So it's hardly surprising that I responded to many things in the world by creating a project like Agents of Ishq, which the stories in this book made their home. Everything in Agents of Ishq, including the list of sexually transmitted infections and the right contraceptive match for you, was cocooned in an atmosphere of pleasure and fun, quite distant from the air of censoriousness and euphemism that surrounds intimate life everywhere else. We would not breathe the air of innovation, was the project's thought. By refusing to be pigeonholed, by keeping all definitions open and in play, I believed we could evolve a new shape, and we would do it along with others, what is today fashionable to term co-creation, but what in those days we just call idealism. The ones who had never had sex, the ones who saw themselves as sexual connoisseurs, and all the others in between would equally shape the contours of this conversation. Only poetry can say what I hoped would happen, which was, as E. E. Cummings wrote, "Your slightest look easily will unclose me, though I have closed myself as fingers. You open always, petal by petal, myself, as spring opens, touching skillfully, mysteriously, her first rose." We wanted to be the slightest look of love, not the scrutinizing gaze. Or maybe only a Bollywood song can express what we wanted to suggest. Aao huzur tumko sitaron mein le chalun, dil jhoom jaye aisi baharon mein le chalun. We wanted to be partners in a romantic adventure.
Thank you so much to both of you. दिल तो मेरा बहुत झूमा दोनों किताब पढ़ के. I would now like to invite members from the audience to ask questions. We have some time for question and answers. If you raise your hands, I can identify you and a mic will reach you.
Like I had a couple of questions. You can read which one you want to answer, actually.
Can you hold the mic a bit closer to?
So I had like 3 questions. You can look at the questions and see which one you like, actually. I think that would be better. Yeah, you want to see which one you want to answer? I think like.
Just choose one. You have to choose
Yeah,
one
fine.
and ask.
Okay, I think this one will be nice. Okay, sorry. Yep. Okay. So if you mentioned softer boundaries and softer consent in one of your points. So if either partner feels like they have violated their partner's boundaries or had their own boundaries violated during a sexual encounter, how do you reconcile with that emotion, be that guilt or a sense of hurt? Like, do you write it down through fiction, as Kazim said, or like when do you bring it up with your partner?
Right. Let's just collect a few questions and then we can all. To her, please, Anjali. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to both the panelists and the moderator for this really enlightening and beautiful session.
Anjali, will you come again? We couldn't hear you. Yeah. No, no, no. Just ask your question again. Yeah.
Okay, okay. No, first of all, thanks for this beautiful session. Lovely. Um, this is very important. You are not doing this just with this thing in mind that this needs to be put out. The granularity of sexuality, of everyday sex lives, all of this is really important. When will the rest of India, especially bureaucratic India, catch up? I'm reminded of a story that a student of mine had to do on online dating and about violence that women face when they are doing online dating. And they went, the student went to the women's police station, and the senior police officers are asking, why are the women on these sites? What are they doing here? When will the rest of the country catch up? Yeah.
Right. We'll take one more question and then I'll invite Kazim and Paromita to respond. Yes.
Okay, you may ask the other questions, answer the other questions, but it occurred to me, Kazim said kind of jokingly that the book was adults only, but I wonder whether seriously you would put any age restriction either on the availability of any kind of queer and sexual material or the representation of people involved in such things.
Okay, okay. So boundaries, bureaucracy, and representation. Yes. The question about boundaries was about how do we make sense of experiences where our boundaries are violated or we end up violating boundaries. The question was about when will bureaucracy catch up, and then how do we represent people of different ages and access to books on age limits.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, there's a politics around access to literature, period, in that unless you have a vibrant public library system, there's economic access issues, meaning you either cannot afford the book or you cannot afford the technology which would allow you to access a book digitally. So I think that's something that that's a policy question more than a creative question, frankly. As far as content goes for this book, jokingly saying, it's more like the level of explicitity of the content in the case of my book that sort of maybe makes it skew in a different direction. But I think I follow what you're saying, because in representing heterosexual love or heterosexual family structures, childhood is sexualized. You know, you have people, not just people like literally being in a prior generation, maybe not this one, getting marriages arranged when my uncle and aunt were arranged to be married when they were infants, actually. So childhood is not a bar to content about family and sexuality in that case, in ways that maybe are disturbing to us. The answer might not be to sexualize queer childhood, but to think about what are the ways that we use sexual reinforcement even for children to reinforce a heteronormative, heterosexual family structure in ways that are bizarre, you know? Like, yeah, anyhow, I would say that. And as far as the question about bureaucracy was what? I don't remember.
When will bureaucracy catch up?
Yeah, I think you answer that one.
I mean, I think to the person who asked about the violation of boundaries, I would say there's first of all a couple of pieces on the Agents Fish website. One of them is in the book, which are about when somebody has been violent and what to do, how to understand this, how to cope with it. And I feel like, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And there has to be some kind of conversation, and there has to be continuous conversations about these experiences around us so that we don't keep trying to squeeze it into one box or the other, because that really breeds more violence. The more we simplify experience and the more we put it in boxes, the more violent life becomes. And that actually speaks to the question on bureaucracy, which wants to box us all. That is why we find it so violent, because we cannot breathe inside that definition of self that is given. It doesn't encapsulate all that we are. And that doesn't mean that bureaucracy or law should not exist, merely that they should be one part of life. They are not all of life, right? And the way that the language of law and bureaucracy has begun to inform our interactions with each other and how we understand our experiences, that's the really scary thing. And that's the flip side of the debates and discourses that emerged from Me Too, that suddenly we began to speak about everything in bureaucratic terms. But I think people in bureaucracy are people. And so you kind of hope that by continuing to be certain ways and make certain communities and build certain languages, some of those people filter into the bureaucracy. They always have, you know. Systems aren't designed to make us happier, but people are designed to be happy. And then sometimes people go into the system and do something that gives us a respite for a while, and I think that's really it. But decentering institutions and decentering bureaucracy and decentering law from our mindset as the place where right and wrong are played out and everything else is invalidated, I think we need to get over that. Lots of us, feminists, teachers, theorists, I think fall into this kind of very carceral logic. We have to watch out for it. And I think a sense of fun, pleasure, and play in day-to-day life, it's the only language through which we can come to know each other slowly, slowly. I'm not trying to quote Priyanka Chopra here, but yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's not a satisfying or total answer to what you're asking, and because perhaps there isn't one, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kazim. Thanks, Paromita. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are out of time, so we'll close here.
Thank you so much for joining this important conversation on identity and relationships in society. We need to have more such conversations and, you know, let the tribe keep growing. Both Kazim's and Paromita's books are available at the Book Point. Feel free
Buy
to
them.
go pick it up, and then, you know, get it autographed. Do not miss this opportunity. And we will get started on the next session in a couple of minutes, in a few minutes, please. Thank you so much, Sneha,
Thank you.
Paromita, and Kazim.
Thank you, Sneha. Please go and buy the book. Today is the day it comes out into shops as well. You should make a 2026 New Year resolution to give it as a gift to everybody.